Happy release day, everybody. I am David Duncan coming to you live from Silver Oak. And literally just now, a car alarm started going off. So I hope you can hear that in the background because we plan these things and no one knows what happens. But we are here to celebrate the 2016 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. It is a beautiful day here in Oakville, and we sure wish you were all here with us live like we normally are. But we have an incredible virtual release day today. We're very excited to share great information about the 16 Napa Explore American Oak. We're going to have a fabulous time. On behalf of my brother Tim, the whole Duncan family, and the whole bunch, welcome to release day. I am joined with my sort of co-host, Mr. Nate Weis, our winemaker. So Nate, I'll kick it to you.
Thank you, David. You know, we like to say that it never rains on release day. We're usually right. But the saying is not that the car alarms don't go off on release day. So it kind of goes how it goes. But thank you all for joining us. If you're out there, this is an important tradition to you. I assure you it's just as important to us. So we're going to keep doing this virtually until we can do it in person once again. I think if you've ever visited us here in Oakville, you kind of recognize where I'm standing. I'm in our glass house. It's almost kind of like Shangri-La. You know, there's at least a bottle of just about every vintage of every wine Silver Oak has ever made. So it's a very special place to us, very sacred place. So we are here to celebrate the 2016 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, but it wouldn't be release day without kicking it off with some Tumi Sauvignon Blanc. You know, it's a fantastic wine for morning, noon, or nights, any of the four seasons, fall, winter, spring, or summer. I like to say it's good for any day that ends in Weis, so I'd like to propose a toast to release day. Cheers. David?
Cheers, Nate. Well, glad to be here. Thanks, Nate. So we have a little movie magic happening here. So Nate and I are actually socially distanced. Our arms did not just disappear. So we have an incredible day today. We are so much looking forward to sharing these things with you. We are going to dive into American Oak with luminaries from the whiskey, wine, and beer world, including Russian River Brewing, old Rip Van Winkle Distillery, and Jefferson's Bourbon are all here. They all use American Oak like Silver Oak, and we're going to dive into that. Of course, we're also going to get into the incredible 16 Napa as well. So Nate, you want to share a little more?
Yeah, if you're a Silver Oak fan, I'm sure you know that we're the only North American winery to own and operate a cooperage focused on American Oak. So it's going to be really fun to talk to these people who are big fans of American Oak and proprietors of these fantastic beverage making companies. But we're also going to be joined by our own Silver Oak president, Mr. Tony LeBlanc, which is very exciting. So, you know, we have to have a moderator for this panel for such a group of heavy hitters. And for this panel, we've got whiskey authority and author Clay Risen. His latest book is called The Impossible Collection of Whiskey. Just published last fall, and it's a serious book. It actually comes in a special wooden case, and it's a serious price tag as well. It costs about $1,000. I did not find a copy of this book in my stocking over Christmas, nor did I find a bottle of Pappy or Old Jefferson's or Pliny the Younger. So I'm going to have a talk with the big guy in the red suit this year.
Well, congratulations, Clay. You know, that's incredible if you're selling your book at Bergdorf Goodman for $1,000. So that's incredible. We cannot wait to hear what you guys have to share with us. Another great tradition on release day is to share our library and large format bottles. And it's something that goes back for many, many decades that we've always pulled out a few special bottles. And so those are available on silveroak.com. In the old days in the tasting room, we would have a chalkboard, and when the wines would sell out, we'd cross them off. And I can tell you, we've already crossed a few off today. So our customer care team is awaiting your email or call or chat. And please check out silveroak.com if you want to acquire some of these really special rare wines that have been always in our cellar, right, Nate?
Yeah, you know, provenance is important. It's important to know where the wines came from. We have these really great old rare wines. As David alluded to, a couple of them have already sold out. We opened this up at 10 o'clock. So we had a really cool set of 1988 5 liters of Napa Valley Cabernet, as well as some 12 liters. 12 liters, that's it's a case and a third, 16 bottles. We had a few of those from 2007 Napa Valley Cabernet, but we still have plenty more. We've got some 6 liters available, another 12 liters, and a lot of other stuff on the website. So feel free to go and peruse. And something special about these large formats today is that our winemaking team spent a few days this week inspecting all these bottles. They uncorked them, opened them up, tasted the wines, made sure they were showing as they were supposed to, topped them back up and recorked them. So they come with sort of a cellared in perfect conditions and has the Silver Oak winemaking team's seal of approval on them.
All right, thanks, Nate. And finally, release day would not be the same without music. And we have an incredibly special guest today, fellow Coloradan, big Silver Oak fan, Mr. Nathaniel Rateliff. And if you're a Nathaniel fan, you know who he is, but he's got a new movie coming out. He's Saturday Night Live next week. We'll talk more about that a little bit later with Nathaniel, but we're very excited about the musical performance. I guess, Nate, you're not the only Nathaniel that's here today.
I had that coming. I saw that one coming. I am well appreciated around here. Some of my underappreciated skills might be my singing and my dancing. I didn't earn the nickname Left Shark for nothing here at Silver Oak and Tumi. But enough about that. Are we ready to talk about Napa Valley Cabernet?
Well, we got a wine talking and a wine tasting. So let's dive in and get into the 16 Napa.
It's the first Saturday in February. So we've got wine tasting, wine talking, and probably my favorite thing, wine consumption. So I've been around Napa Valley my whole life. I was around the wine business from an early age. I was raised here in St. Helena. But today you don't have to take my word for it on the Napa Valley Cabernet. We've brought in a panel of outside experts, and I'm going to get the chance to introduce them to you now. And I'm really excited to introduce this first person. She's very near and dear to my heart. And that's our own Laura Oskwarek. So Laura started with us in 2009 as lab manager here in Oakville. She's now the Napa Valley winemaker, responsible for all the winemaking for Silver Oak Napa Valley. And, she's a scientist by nature. She's an enologist by training. She has a fantastic palate. She's great to taste with. And one of the things I really appreciate about her is she's got a wicked sense of humor. And it's about as dry as that Napa Valley Cabernet you're going to taste today, or the Sauvignon Blanc that might be in your glass. So, over 7 years of working together, it's been such a privilege to watch her grow and develop as a professional and also as a person. And I'm really excited to have her today and have her comment on these wines. So she'll be joined by 2 of our really good friends. The first is Amanda McCrossin. Amanda is a certified sommelier, and she's also a wine personality, let's say. She's a renowned expert on all things Napa Valley wine, not least of which because she oversaw the wine list of Press Restaurants in St. Helena, which is a repository of all sorts of classic wines from the Napa Valley. And last year, she launched the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast with her friend Vanessa Conlin. And it's a really, really fun podcast. If you're into them, I highly recommend it. They talk to athletes, celebrities, comedians. They even talk to Adam Davison of NPR's Planet Money. And they kind of look at wine through all these different filters and lenses. And so if you like podcasts, I'd say definitely get that on your feed. So she is going to be joined today by Vanessa Conlin. And Vanessa is a master of wine and the head of wine for Wine Access. She's one of only 53 masters of wine in the United States, and one of only, need to make sure I get this right, 378 worldwide. So the name kind of says it all. It's an incredibly difficult certification to achieve, and you really are a master of wine from top to bottom. Grape growing, wine making, wine marketing and sales, it's all part of the deal. So she's definitely an expert on everything wine related. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you ladies. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nate, and cheers to you. Thank you so much for having myself and Vanessa here on a day that I know myself and the entire Valley and wine loving community look forward to every single year. It is such an honor to be here. And even more so, this is sort of a pinch myself moment because Silver Oak is such an iconic winery, and to the point where we actually call it, Vanessa and I have joked so many times, a winery that's a 1 in 5. And I'll let Vanessa tell you what that means.
No, well, first of all, yes, cheers. Thank you so much for having us here. It's such an honor. It's so exciting. But to Amanda's point, have so much fun on the podcast. We get to taste a lot of different wines. I get to hang out with my friend Amanda, which is a huge benefit. But we also get to talk to celebrities from all sorts of different industries. And we have a joke, and it's only funny because it's true, in that listeners might actually think that Silver Oak is a sponsor of the podcast because it's mentioned so many times. They're not a sponsor, but if you're interested, you know where to find us. But yeah, we've had numerous guests talk about Silver Oak in terms of their having a great experience visiting or having this sort of pivotal wine moment in their life that was courtesy of these wines. And just off the top of my head, I can think of comedian Tom Papa, who I love, singer and songwriter Carly Pierce, and then athletes like Tiki Barber, and of course, Red Sox Hall of Famer Nomar Garcia Parra, who we learned on the podcast not only loves Silver Oak, but actually became really good friends with former Silver Oak winemaker Daniel Barron.
Noma, yeah, what
Noma.
a mentor to have.
Yeah.
We love mentor. We love mentor. We love Nomar so much. What an amazing guy. And I have to tell you, Vanessa, it's been such a pleasure to talk to all of these guests and hear that they love Silver Oak so much, because it really is a classic, legendary, iconic. I mean, you name the name, it is that.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, truly beyond the brand, and it is a brand that I think, you know, working with many of the Napa Valley wines, you could always sort of spot it across the cellar, across the room. But you don't get to legendary status without the quality of winemaking that they have. So with that in mind, I think, to me, one of the most fascinating facets of Silver Oak is the winemaking process and how this wine comes to be year after year. So Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you, can you talk a little bit about how Silver Oak happens and give us sort of like the good details?
Absolutely. I would love to. Amanda and Vanessa, first of all, I want to thank you both for being with us today. We are super excited here at Silver Oak to be releasing the 2016 and sharing it with you and all of our guests watching at home today. So I am at the winery right now, and I figure, you know, there are about 1,000 things I love about this facility and I love about working here, but I'll talk about a couple of things that I think make this winery extra special. The most important thing, obviously, is that we make the Napa Valley Cabernet here, and that's all we do at this facility. So this winery was designed and constructed with just this one wine in mind. You can see here the beautiful cellar. I like to refer to this as my office. I probably have the biggest office in the whole winery. But, you know, with the fact that we only focus on one wine, everything is designed perfectly. So no matter what we need to do, from how we receive our fruit to the tanks that we select during harvest, when and how we bottle, or the enviable amount of space that we get to spread out in to do our work, especially our barrel work. The other thing that I think is really important to point out about this facility is the sustainability aspect of it. We were the world's first LEED Platinum production facility in the world. So that's something that we're really proud of.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Laura, and really hats off. That's such an amazing admirable achievement. And I was lucky enough to actually learn a little bit about this when I was on the last step of earning my Master of Wine credential. The final step is writing a research paper. And I live here in Napa Valley. I love it here. Of course, I wanted to focus on something that was meaningful for me and my community. So my paper was about, vineyard owners and winery ownership in Napa Valley. And a portion of that was, of course, to talk about family-owned wineries and the sort of generational transition and how that all works. So the first person I thought of to call was, of course, Matt Duncan, who is one of my absolute favorite people, but is Tim's son and on the wholesale team. And incidentally, I just want to point out that I did learn from Matt that just because his last name is Duncan does not mean that he was handed a role at the winery. I have learned many stories about him doing unglamorous jobs like working the glue machine on the bottling line. So he really knows the business from top to bottom. But in any case, I was lucky enough to spend some time with Matt. He walked me through the vineyards, and I learned so much about the innovation that's being utilized there, And I think something that's interesting to note is there's such a consistency of quality throughout every vintage of Silver Oak. They of course show the nature of that vintage, but given that there's this consistency, one might think, oh, they're just doing the same thing every year. But what I learned was, in fact, it's the absolute opposite, that every single year you and your team are looking at how to improve efficiency, conservation, all of course with an eye towards quality in the glass. So I would love to hear more, Laura, about what you're doing there.
Sure, I would absolutely love to talk more about sustainability because it's something that is so important to us. It's a commitment that the Duncan family takes very seriously, and we actually find that it helps us make better wine. So a couple ways that happens, I'll start out in the vineyard. We get to use technology and collect data so that we can make really purposeful, precise viticultural decisions with our farming out there. And so one of the big things I think to focus on is water. Water is our number one resource in this industry, especially in this area here in California. So being able to give the vines exactly what they need when they need it, I think promotes vine health. It reduces our water by quite a bit, and it impacts the fruit quality. Like, it really improves the fruit quality, and then that ultimately trickles into our winemaking. Here on the winery side, sustainability really touches everything from the solar panels that literally keep our lights on to the fact that a lot of the bottling supplies that we purchase are coming from local vendors. And that is so helpful because we get to work very closely with our vendors, focus on the quality of the products that we're receiving, and it reduces our carbon footprint by quite a bit. So sustainability is really important to us here. We've done a lot with our construction and our farming and our winemaking, and all of these efforts are efforts that we're really proud of here.
So something else I'd love to discuss is, we talk about release day. And of course, as Amanda mentioned, this would be a day that I would love to be a part of when we were there in person, but that I would avoid because of traffic if I wasn't attending. And because you're located, right there in the heart of Oakville, and, for passersby, it might be sort of the logical assumption to think that all of the vineyards are actually right there on the winery property. But in fact, I think a lot of your vineyards are actually are mountainous. So I would love to hear, how do you think those different vineyards contribute to the final wine?
Vanessa, you bring up a really good point because we are located centrally here in the heart of the valley, but the majority of the fruit that goes into making our Cabernet is coming from mountain and hillside properties. So sometimes as much as 90%. And actually, this is maybe a good time to raise a glass and toast. And I'll talk about 3 properties that I think are really integral into making this wine so special. So we'll start at the top at Atlas Peak. This is the highest elevation where we're sourcing fruit. You can see a picture of our Jump Rock Vineyard. Now, this property is dedicated primarily to growing Cabernet. And what we look for from this kind of this mountain fruit is a rich, dense textures and tannins. This is what is going to help the wine age for a really long time. As we come down off of the mountain, we're going to hit the benchland. This is where our hillside vineyards are located. And you can see a really beautiful picture of Soda Canyon Ranch. This is probably one of my favorite properties. I love to sneak out there as often as possible. And this property is so very special to us here at Silver Oak. We've owned it and farmed it for over 20 years. And this property really makes up the backbone of our Napa Valley Cabernet. We grow all 5 Bordeaux varietals on this site, and each one offers a little something extra special to the wine. But I think the thing that really stands out to me about this site are the textures, the layers, the complexity, and the structure that we're getting off of this site. So as we finish our little tour, we'll actually land in the valley, and we're going to go north to St. Helena. This is where the Navoni Vineyard is located. This is a property that we farm and we source fruit from. This is classic valley fruit. It's rich, it's dense, it's concentrated red fruit character, and it adds a real beautiful elegance on the palate. So we combine all of these different vineyards, and of course we select some fruit from growers that we work very closely with, and we get this really beautiful expression of Napa Valley Cabernet that I think is unique to Silver Oak. And that's maybe a very technical winemaker description of this wine. So Amanda and Vanessa, I'd love to hear what you have to say as you're tasting through the wine.
Absolutely. And I think I'm so glad that you brought up the texture side of things, because for me, I think when I'm talking about wine, texture is so important and probably one of the most overlooked things when you're talking and describing wines. But, texturally, this wine has so many different layers. And as you talked about the different vineyards, and I'm so excited that you love the Soda Canyon Vineyard, because it's one of my favorites to visit as well. I don't blame you for speaking out the way that you did. I have this sort of patchwork, this little snapshot of Napa Valley in my glass right now, with lots of different textures and lots of different flavors. So as much as we get that classic cassis and blackcurrant, that really rich Cabernet smell and taste, I also love all of the different textures that I'm getting. Some of this more like electric, more grippy tannins from the mountain vineyard, but then this like soft plushy thing that's happening from the St. Helena Valley floor fruit. It's such a beautiful representation of the grape, and also of the vintage, which I think we'd be remiss to not talk about. 2016 was one of my favorites, and I'm sure a lot of you out there watching, for you as well. 2016 just is such a hit in Napa Valley. Vanessa, I'd love your take on this, though. I know we've shared a number of bottles of Silver Oak before.
We haven't, and I second your comment about the textural component, Amanda, and that so much of, for me, the enjoyment of wine is beyond the aromas and the flavors, which of course in this glass are sort of classic, balanced, elegant Napa Cab. But so much of what I appreciate about really beautifully well-made wine is this, what I call like a palate shape. And for me, this has that. It's got that sort of beautiful structure that holds up the wine with this backbone, but then you get this, of course, like plush, generous fruit in the core of it as well. And one of the other things I love about the 16, but I have to say across vintages of Silver Oak in general, is that no matter where you are in your wine journey, or whether one prefers a fruit that or wine that's more primary or more tertiary, there's always enjoyment to be found in Silver Oak. And Amanda, I'm sure you got this question a lot, especially when you were on the floor as a wine director, and that people often ask, when should I open a wine? When is the right time to open a wine? And of course, the answer is impossible for me to answer for them, because it depends on, what do you like? What's your preference in where the maturity of a wine is? And so what I think is outstanding and exceptional about Silver Oak is that it's very approachable upon release. But for those that like to enjoy a wine with a bit more age on it, like I do, it also will definitely reward you for, patience in the cellar. So Laura, I just have to say, congratulations again. I mean, I've tasted many vintages of this wine, but the 16 in front of me right now is absolutely beautiful. So cheers to you. It's delicious.
Cheers, ladies. Thank you so much. I love your notes. I think sometimes it's helpful to hear somebody talk about the wine as you're tasting through, because you get to pick out those little things. And I think you did the wine justice. So thank you so much. And I think you brought up something that is really important. It's the approachability, and the question sometimes that I often get here as well is, when do I open up the wine? And we have to realize that we're enjoying the 2016 vintage right now, and it's 2021. So it's been a long 5-year journey to get the fruit off of the vine and into the glass to the point where we can enjoy it. And, there's so many steps that it takes to get to this point. But I think one of the things that really jumps out at me right now, only because we just finished doing it recently, is the blending process. So Nate and I just recently finished blending the 2020 vintage. And here's a really great example of what that looks like, at least when we start blending, because by the end of a blending session, it's quite a mess. But we hit the bench with sometimes as many as 50 or 60 or even more wines that we need to figure out how we're going to put together. And it's really neat that we have that ability, because we ferment everything separately. but it can take weeks and well over probably 100 permutations to get all of those pieces together to the point where we have a wine that we get to share with everyone. And so blending, right? We blend and then we barrel down. And that is another thing that is really unique to Silver Oak, is that we do it in that order. So blending 2 years in barrel and then another 2 years in bottle, to the point that we get to finally enjoy it. And so our goal with our winemaking is to have our wine be enjoyable, approachable, and delicious upon release, but it is definitely capable of aging for many, many decades, so that no matter when the occasion presents itself, no matter when you want to open up a bottle of Silver Oak, you can trust and feel confident that you're going to enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I've been looking at some of the comments in the chat right now about who's drinking what right now. And I saw a little while ago, someone's got an 86 Bonnie's open, which is one of my favorite wines that I've ever had.
Ooh,
it was the wine that we had it. It was a wine that we had at press, and it was just like so delicious. But I love that everyone's sort of drinking through the decades today. It's a fun way to celebrate. Thinking about your wedding session though, that picture was like kind of alarming to see. And I'm so glad that you brought up blending, because it's one of those things that we forget is like such a critical part of the winemaking process, but it really is what makes you guys so distinct. I'm thinking right now about like how your teeth look after the fact, because mine are like purple already. And if you've got purple teeth, put it in the comments, because I think we're all going to be there by the end of the day. But one of the other things that makes Silver Oak so unique and is really a hallmark, and sort of why we're here today, is the American oak component. And thinking back to Napa Valley, pre-70s, Andrei Telechev era, bringing in a lot of the French oak, it was sort of an outlier choice for Silver Oak to be using American oak. But one that we've thought of, that a different choice, but not a bad one. And I think as we think about American oak, we think about it slightly differently. And there's so many amazing wines, iconic wines, present company, of course, included, that are using American oak and choosing to use American oak as part of their oak regime. So Vanessa, I know you and I have shared a number of bottles of Silver Oak, as I mentioned, and some of the other ones as well.
Definitely, but I think you said it right. It's just a choice. It's a different choice. I know that that people often talk about oak as being sort of the winemaker spice rack in terms of what they want for it to impart to the wine. But of course there are legendary, iconic wineries around the world that use American oak. I mean, of course, Vega Sicilia Unico from Ribera del Duero. I mean, for Rioja, honestly, for forever, and then even something like Penfolds Grange from Australia. So it's a choice to bring in certain qualities to the wine. And I think though, what's aside from the use of American oak, what's really interesting and unique about Silver Oak is the fact that you do own your own cooperage. And I was thinking about this prior to us jumping on, if I could name, how many can I name? And when I think of other wineries that have that kind of quality control in terms of the barrels that they're going to use, I think of things like Guigal in the Rhone. I think of Chateau Lafite. I think of Chateau Aubryon. So we're talking, this is really kind of an elite group of wineries that have that option to have that quality control at their fingertips. But to go back to kind of what it imparts to the wine, I mean, I think to put it in very simple terms, some things that, let's say, as wine professionals, if we're blind tasting, we look for to identify the type of oak. Some common descriptors for American would be things like coconut and dill. But that's probably, very simple in terms of all the array of aromas and flavors that one might get from an American oak barrel. So I'd love to hear, Laura, from you, what you think that it imparts to the wine.
Yes. So with barrel programs, we have to realize that American oak has just not been as widely used or for as long as French oak, especially in the wine industry. And maybe because of that, there might be a limited perception about what American oak has to contribute to wines. Obviously, we've been using it since the beginning, almost 50 years. And there are a number of things that we look for with American oak. some of the things that I find that it contributes are notes of vanilla and baking spice, depending on the toast levels. And American oak also has a really beautiful freshness, which I often would describe as like a bay leaf character. And then on the palate, American oak is really unique because it has fine grained tannins. And what that adds is a creaminess, which is really nice. And what also, I think probably for me, the biggest thing is that American oak has the ability to enhance the red fruit character and add like a pop of vibrancy. And it's just beautiful. It's super special to us. You mentioned that, you know, we own our own cooperage. That gives us a lot of ability to experiment. But I know we have a panel coming up and they're going to do a big deep dive on American oak. So I just really look forward to hear what they have to say.
I too am looking forward to what they have to say. I think American oak is one of those things that you know, is a little bit misunderstood. And I look forward to hearing from the experts about that. And, you know, I think you brought up something really, really important, Laura, and something that I've thought about a lot, especially having worked with really, really old vintages of Napa Valley Cabernet that were using American oak. Of course, not to the degree that you guys are using with your own Missouri Cooper, but there is sort of this like sun-kissed cradle that happens as a result of California fruit being married with the American oak. And it is such a beautiful combination. I think one that you guys do so, so well. You know, with that in mind, I think we have a lot to talk about today. Yeah. I want to say a special hello to my family in Pennsylvania that's watching right now, and to all the people in Pennsylvania. There's so many people in Pennsylvania watching, and I'm in Pennsylvania. But with that in mind, we've got a lot to talk about, and I hope you didn't mind the shout outs. And I'm going to turn it back to, you know, I was going to do it. I'm going to turn it back because we're going to take some questions from the panel. So Nate, I think it's over back to you now. I'm going to grab my glass and drink some more.
Close enough. That's okay. It's coming to me. That's great. Thank you so much, Vanessa and Amanda and Laura. That was incredibly informative and awesome to have you guys enjoying a glass of wine with us. We really appreciate it. So we do have a couple of questions. They're coming to us live on our little screen here in front of us. So the first question is for Laura and comes from Aaron in New York, and is, Laura, what is your favorite vintage that you've worked on since you've been at Silver Oak?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. So I started, you know, I don't know, I would probably have to say my first vintage, the 2009. And I still have a few bottles left over at home that I get to enjoy. So I think that one just has a lot of special meaning for me just because it was my first vintage here.
All right, 2009. Thank you. So let's see. Our next question is from Chris. And it says, we have a 2012 Napa Valley Cab. Should we hold it or drink it? Laura, Nate, what do you guys think?
Laura, please take that one.
Oh, well, you know, whenever you open it is going to be a special occasion. So I would say, feel confident that if you open it now, you're going to really enjoy it. I had that vintage not that long ago and it was showing really beautifully. But if you feel like you want to hold it for another occasion, I would say that that's fine. It's going to hold beautifully. What do you think, Nate? Have you tasted that vintage recently?
Yeah, you know, 2012. So for me, Silver Oak tends to really hit its stride about 10 years after vintage. Of course, at release, it's open, it's precocious, it jumps right out at you. There's always kind of an interesting phase in between where it gets a little bit dumb for a little while, and I, you know, wine chemistry wise, I'm not sure why that's the case, but about 10 years after vintage is where they really start to sing for me, in kind of the 15 to 20 range. So 2012, you're not far from that. I'd say I would agree with Laura for sure that next time you have a drinking occasion, it'd be a good time to do it.
All right, we have one for Vanessa and Amanda coming to us from Jennifer from Texas. Jennifer's asking, excuse me, how can we watch your podcast, and what inspired you to start one?
Well, I'll take this, and then Vanessa can chime in on the inspiration. the podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. And then if you want to watch any snippets of it, you can follow us on Instagram at Wine Access Unfiltered. And I mean, really the inspiration, and Vanessa, chime in here, but the inspiration really came from conversations that I was personally having on the floor at Press with celebrities and people that were coming in about wine. And then Vanessa, I know same for you. You were having conversations with people from all over many different industries about wine.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the inspiration was that, we can talk to each other in the wine business about wine, but what's really fascinating is when you start talking to people who love wine but aren't in the industry, the types of questions that you get, the types of comments, and what we've learned from people in terms of how they enjoy wine, where they enjoy it, their first experience, their pivotal experience has been really fascinating. And as I mentioned earlier, that's comedians, that's athletes, it's musicians, it's economists, it runs the gamut. But that was the inspiration, to hear from all sorts of different types of wine appreciators.
Yeah. And if I can just say, neither Vanessa nor I came from wine drinking households and backgrounds. And so for us, it's been an amazing way to connect with people that are not in the wine industry and sort of bring more people into the fold like us who didn't come up with wine that have stories to tell.
All right. Thank you, Amanda and Vanessa. We really appreciate you guys joining us. Happy release day. We have time for one more question. And that question I'm tossing to Laura, which is, can you describe briefly the difference between the 2016 Alexander Valley and the 2016 Napa Valley?
Sure. So we released the 16 AV back in August. And so now we have the 16 Napa. And I think there are quite a few differences. For me, I find that the Napa Valley has a little more density, a little bit more complexity on the palate. We do use a little bit more new American oak on this wine, and I think you can pick that up quite a bit. The Alexander Valley, the last time I tasted it, it was just really, really vibrant and really elegant. So they're both beautiful wines and they both have their differences, but those are some of the things that I typically find, especially with the 16 and the fact that they're current release.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. So let's transition to our next segment. Nate, I think you're going to take this one.
Yes, I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing somebody very special to me as well. He's a man that is typically behind the scenes here at Silver Oak and Tumi, but today he gets to get in front of the camera, which I'm sure he's just absolutely thrilled with. But that's our very own president of Silver Oak, Mr. Tony LeBlanc. Human Resources won't let me tell you how old he is, but I can tell you this. He started working for us in 1992. So I'm sure he was 15, 17, something like that when he started with us way back then. And, ever since then, he's worked really closely with a team at the Oak Cooperage, which is our cooperage in Higbee, Missouri. We consider him to be sort of our in-house expert on barrel making and running a cooperage. A cooperage, of course, is a place that you make barrels. And he's intimately involved in that business. So, Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks for that introduction, Nate. Unfortunately, there's good reason why I sound old in that introduction. I am passionate about oak. I love talking about it. I just don't think people think very much about the barrel when it comes to the glass they have in their hand if they're drinking beer or bourbon or wine, right? And we are awfully fortunate to have this panel of top American producers with us today to help us talk about oak, right? So I was first introduced to American oak from Missouri. Geez, it's almost 40 years ago now. And those barrels really weren't up to the aesthetics that we were accustomed to with the French oak barrels, but they had this great flavor we were so attracted to. It's the same flavors that Laura can much more eloquently than I talked to when she talks about the Silver Oak wines earlier. And as a barrel producer, it's been really interesting to see there's a much greater interest in the seasoned wood from our friends in the spirits business. I'm fascinated by that, and I hope that the bourbon guys will talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of products traditionally aged in American oak in addition to beer, bourbon, and wine, right? And so we've got rum and ginger ale and root beer and Tabasco and even maple syrup. And I think Laura and Amanda were talking earlier, it's American oak's a relatively young industry, and I think we're just scratching the surface of everything it might have to offer. I can't hear Nate.
Different trials of spirits aged in seasoned wood as well as not. So it's really fascinating to think about the history of American oak and barrels in general.
So one of the things, so our panel today is going to be moderated by Clay Risen. And so we're super excited to have Clay join us. Clay is a historian and writer for the New York Times and is really the country's foremost expert on spirits. His first book was called American Whiskey, Bourbon, and Rye, and has sold more than 100,000 copies. Other works by Clay include Single Malt, and just last year, he published a book called The Impossible Whiskey Collection, where he had the envious task and the budget, I might add, to taste 100 of the most coveted whiskeys in the world. Clay, I'd love to see your book and read it, but man, it's expensive. So welcome, Clay.
Thanks a lot, David. And, I figure these days no one's driving. So, just sell your car and you can probably buy a couple of copies, give some away to your friends. But look, I'm very happy to be here because, as Tony said, wood is just not something that we really think about. And as someone who grew up in bourbon culture, I came from Nashville, Tennessee, and spent a lot of time in Kentucky. Growing up, wood was not something we talked about, the impact of wood on whiskey. And today we're starting to see more people think about that and to start to talk about what exactly is the influence of American wood. So I think that's something that we'll get into today with our panelists. So in addition to Tony, we have three just bang up experts on this question. The first we have is Vinnie Cilurzo. He's the co-founder of the Russian River Brewing Company right there in Sonoma. He joins us live from the brewery's Pliny the Younger release, which, if people don't know, that is literally the rarest and most sought after beer in the world. It is just a beautiful beer, but everything they make is fantastic. Normally there would be lines around the corner, down the street, out the town, but obviously this is in COVID time, so they're doing their releases online. And Vinnie actually, along with his wife, they have a great sort of backstory with Silver Oak. They go back a long time with the winery, and actually they have used Silver Oak barrels in their Belgian release, or the Belgian inspired release, which is called Consecration. We also have with us Trey Zoeller. Trey is the founder of Jefferson's Bourbon, which is also just one of the best, most highly regarded bourbon makers in Kentucky. They are world renowned and best known for their small batch releases, but also for one release that I particularly love that they call Ocean, that is actually aged on ships as they go from port to port to try to replicate what the aging process was like centuries ago when it actually went into the wood as fresh whiskey, and by the time it got down the rivers and through the seas to New York or wherever it was going, it would be brown and luscious and just tastes like the bourbon we enjoy today. And last we have Julian Van Winkle, which if you can guess by his surname, he needs no introduction. He is the head honcho at Old Rip Van Winkle, which produces, among other whiskeys, the Pappy Van Winkle that we all know, and hopefully some of us have had the opportunity to try. He's also the subject of a new book, which is called Pappyland. It also allows me to kind of rib him because finally he has something to sell, something to talk about that we can all enjoy, unlike some of his whiskeys. So what I'd like to do with these four panelists is really kind of explore some of these questions about American wood. And I want to start with Tony. You've been working with American wood for a long time, and as someone who really knows the product, knows that vessel, what can you say as far as the advantages of American wood? Why would you choose that over, French or something else?
Well, good afternoon, Clay. I've been working with Silver Oak and American Oak from Missouri for almost 30 years. And frankly, the answer is really pretty simple. It tastes great. The nutty toasted character, the soft tannins, they contribute that rich, creamy textural components to the wines that we've been talking about. American Oak, it really just works great with the softer, more delicate wine style. The other thing I talk about is the sustainability, right? So it's much more efficient for us to source the barrels from Missouri. And it really contributes to that all-American nature of the Silver Oak wines, the grapes, the barrels, the glass, the majority of the packaging components all come from as close to home as we can. And that really helps us manage, natural resources more conservatively.
When you think about American Oak versus French, or have you worked with French or Hungarian or other oak styles, and how do they compare, and why do you come down on the side of American Oak?
So yes, I've definitely worked with some other woods, and I have a tremendous respect for those coopers, but I am especially biased. So I'll have to say, I think if they could grow their trees in Missouri and season their wood and the climate there, their barrels would be much better.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me ask you a question. This will go to all the panelists, and maybe I'll start with Trey on this one. You guys have all been working with barrels for a long time. You have a lot of experience with what I think of is really as a technology more than anything else. We think of barrels as kind of looking the same as and working the same as they always have, but we all know that these days coopers and distillers or vintners or brewers can do amazing things with barrels. So what have you seen? How have you seen barrels, particularly American barrels, change over the course of your career? Trey, we'll start with you.
So, first, there wasn't much option when I started back in 1997. All bourbon has to age in American oak. So that wasn't anything that I really explored at the time. What we were looking for back then were good barrels, quality barrels, non-leakers. That's what you wanted more so than anything. And as Tony said, we did got most of our wood from Missouri. It wasn't until actually the 100th year anniversary of Independent Stave Company that I was invited back to their cooperage in Missouri, that I saw all the work that they were doing with different wine barrels and spirit barrels from around the world, that I really started to dig in and see what different technologies could be used on the barrel to really manipulate it one way or the other. So I'd been to the cooperages in Kentucky many times, and we're pretty rudimentary in what we typically do with bourbon, which is age it in barrels that have been charred. So there's a 4-point charring system, 1 being the lightest, 4 being the deepest. But when I went back and became a barrel chef for a couple of days and saw how you can institute slow cooking and flash charring and basically following a roadmap of time and temperature to bring out bigger vanilla flavors or butterscotch flavors or what have you, that I saw how much you can do with oak. And those possibilities are available now that weren't 20 years ago. So really, the cooperages at the time, it was pretty basic. It was just how long of a big flame would they put inside the barrel. Along with the flame, the more porous the barrel became, the more porous it became, the deeper the bourbon could come into it. That being said, a deeper char would override some of the secondary flavors. So that's really how I've seen it kind of change in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, Julian, what about you? Now, you come from a long line of distillers and bourbon men. How do you think barrels today differ from what your dad, your grandfather worked with?
First of all, hello everyone, nice to see you. And I do have my bottle of Tumi Sauvignon Blanc. I was trying to sell some wine here, right? I haven't opened it, but we're having grouper tonight. We're down in Florida, so we're going to give it a shot. First of all, the barrels had 8 hoops on them back then instead of sticks these days. Obviously, money is a big factor in that. That really helped in evaporation and loss, and didn't have as many casualty barrels as we do these days. It's hell to go dump a 23-year-old barrel and have it be empty, but it happens. That's it. We have a little ceremony over a grave on those babies, but the construction has really improved, and the knowledge of air drying and curing outside for months and even years sometimes really affects the flavors, I'm sure you all know. So it's really just the making of bourbon whiskey is the same it's always been pretty much, except the stills are a little different here and there with the new craft distilleries around. But basically, it's the construction of the barrels has improved. So and the quality of the wood and obviously different areas of Western Kentucky and North Georgia and Missouri and Arkansas produces different oaks. So it's there's a lot of variables, and with our whiskey being so old, it's really one of the most important parts that we focus on. So I'm fascinated by aging spirits, anything with alcohol in it, whether it be wine or beer, in American oak. So we have a lot to learn, but it's a long learning curve, but we're gaining on it.
Sure. And Vinnie, now, I'd say that of all these categories, beer is one where people don't think about wood at all. But obviously you do, both in terms of the aging, but, specifically the finishes that you dial in. So how has that changed for you?
Yeah, well, first off, it's great to be here. Tony, good to see you. I remember those days when you and I were pulling wine together at release days at Alexander Valley when Justin was still with us. So it's good to be here. So thank you for having me. For us, the changes are a little more difficult to see because we are relying on our winery partners to get the as we're pulling barrels from them. So as we move through our process of procuring barrels, we're not just looking at the type of oak, American oak, French oak being the primary sources. We're also looking at what was once in the barrel. I'll focus on Consecration, our beer that we use exclusively American oak because we're using Silver Oak barrels, and we're grateful to be able to get those, and it really makes a difference. We look a lot in the beer world. We're using wild yeast, Brettanomyces, which is a 4-letter word for most winemakers out there, and also good bacteria. Most times you hear bacteria and it's a negative connotation, but bacteria is good for you. Think of probiotics, think of kombucha, that sort of thing. So anyways, we're using Brettanomyces or Brett and bacteria. And the type of wood we use is really important because the French oak is more porous. American oak is a tighter grain. And so you get much different oxygen diffusion that way. And a lot of the growth of the bacteria and the acidity that it creates is from that oxygen diffusion that's happening in the different types of wood.
See, and Tony, let me tweak this just a little bit and ask you, what are you most excited about with regards to American wood and the innovations that you see around it? What is the thing that you are so excited about, what you can do with an American barrel today that maybe you couldn't have done 20 years ago?
Since we basically hand make barrels, people have been making barrels for thousands of years, and really many of the aspects for us are the same as they've always been, right? But it really, I think, just like you might say that you make the best wines from the best grapes, I think we're looking at we're going to make the best barrels from the best wood. And so for us, that really is this concentration on the trees grown in Missouri the stave seasoned on our yard at the cooperage. And then as we're bringing the wood into the cooperage a few years later, we're really looking at the tight grain. We're eliminating any wood defects. And then really we focus on a consistency to time and temperature on the wood fire as we bend and toast, right? So I think if we do all of that really well, we're really making a dependable vessel with really predictable flavors. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing, I think, is really focusing a real intense discipline across the entire process of making the barrels by hand.
Yeah, well, let me pick up on something that you hinted at there, and I don't want to use this word incorrectly, but it does sound. You talk about Missouri oak, and it reminds me of terroir and the way that people talk about where you grow the particular grapes and where down to specific sites. I know with barrel making, it works that way as well, even to the point of the microbiome, the microbes that take that take root in some of those staves as they season, and whether you do it in this part of Kentucky or that part of Kentucky. Let me throw it open, to all of you. How important is, not just American oak? We're not just talking about the species, but where that oak comes from. If it's Missouri versus Tennessee or Kentucky, how much do you think about that? Julian, can I start you with that? How important is Missouri oak or Kentucky oak to you?
Well, we obviously our partners Buffalo Trace have a better handle on that. That would be Harlan Wheatley, who's really into the specifics of. I mean, you would love to get in his brain. This guy is incredible.
Yeah, he is.
So they've done all these. They have this experimental collection where they've put the same whiskey in different barrels from different parts of the country, from different counties, even in Missouri and so forth. And the terroir is incredibly different. We thought our terroir was the warehouse, which construction and location, and that does affect the flavor of the whiskey in the barrel. But obviously, the wood, I think, has more to do with it, and can really make a big difference. But he knows a lot about that. But it's specifically, I don't. We're looking for something that's like the tight grain is obviously very important, and no knots in the construction of the barrels. You can't have any knots in the wood and so forth. It affects the flavor. And the most unique thing that I found out tasting, we taste every barrel before we bottle it, honestly. And sometimes you'll get a young barrel. I describe it as young, and you can taste. It's almost like white dog. It's like the moonshine. It tastes a little bit too much like some unaged whiskey in there, and that's because I think when the lumber guys and the stave guys take a cut of that hard oak, the heartwood of the log, so to speak, they might gather a little bit of the sapwood, and that does not age well at all. So that's what you want, is that tight grain and the heartwood of the heart part of the log. So it's very important, and it does affect the flavor.
Okay.
One thing Trey mentioned about bourbon being aged in new oak. It doesn't have to be American oak. It can be French oak. And French oak, I hate to say this, my father and grandfather are going to roll over in their graves, but French oak really produces a very nice bourbon. It's just too damn expensive. I mean, whiskey and good wine goes for a lot of money these days, but I don't know if we can afford that. But it's a very interesting and a different flavor. And it's not, they're both great, and they're both very different, but it is an incredibly different product. But it's so fascinating to try all these different oaks and locations. So like I say, we have a long way to go on picking out something that we just like just right.
Yeah, sure. Now, Tony, what about you? You dropped Missouri a few times, and why would you take Missouri oak over Kentucky or Tennessee or any other region? You think, those aren't that far apart, but why does it matter?
Well, yeah, we think geography does matter. And over the years, we've made barrels from wood from Arkansas, Tennessee, and Ohio, Minnesota. Yet over the years, as we taste through those wines blind at the winery, we're always drawn back to and attracted to the Missouri wood, right? And why is that? So I think it's really about the subtle flavor characters that we're so attracted to, and how they work so well with kind of our more food friendly and delicate wines.
Okay. And Trey and Vinnie, let me ask you a question, because both of you have used barrels to wine barrels to finish your products. And how do you think about those barrels when you're looking for barrels to finish a bourbon or a beer in? How do you think about those differently? Trey, in particular, how do you think about that finishing barrel differently from the way that you think about a barrel that you would use for your primary aging? Vinnie, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Trey.
Yes, so I'm looking at, I mentioned the difference between French and American oak, French being more porous, so we get more oxygen diffusion, and American being less. But I'm also looking at the age of the barrel. That's a huge deal for us, because I don't want to overload the beer with too much oak. And we get more full, aggressive flavors in our beer from American oak. But we specifically paired it with a strong, high alcohol beer as well, Consecration. So it works well together, and that was all thought out. Whereas we use French oak for some softer, more delicate type beers. So that's the something that we're always looking at. And then we can drill down also into the size of the barrel, and there's so much that can, that's a rabbit hole that we can go down as well. But those are the type of oak, the age of the barrel, and what was in it are probably the three things that we're looking at the most. We are very fortunate because we're in the middle of wine country that we can buy all of our wine barrels, our used wine barrels direct. We don't have to go through a broker. Unfortunately, there's a lot of low quality barrels that come from brokers, and I'm sure Trey and Julian have seen this before, and it's why we buy direct for everything. So I'm very, very grateful that we have those direct relationships as well, to be able to go and see the barrels, smell them, touch them, and taste the wine that was in them before. That goes a long ways.
Got it. And Trey, we're going to let you have the last comment here. If you want to just tell us a little bit about how you think about finishing barrels, and why, particularly the wine finishes that you do. What's kind of your thought process that goes in there?
It's really about what's in the barrel prior to us finishing in that. So we age our bourbon 7 to 8 years before getting the finishing barrel. We've done a couple in Napa, one with Groth with their Cabernet, one with Chapelet, their Pritchard Hill vintage, which probably by way the crow flies is not 5 miles apart. Yet Groth being on the valley floor and Pritchard Hill being on the side of the hill, those two Cabernets produce very different tasting wines that show up in the bourbon, and it's finished that way. And you get all the fruit that you would expect from a big Napa Cab coming out when we finish it. We finish those generally 12 to 15 months. So Pritchard Hill, for instance, is known for their black cherry and chocolate flavors, and those really come out beginning, or particularly on the front end of the taste. We finished in Pichon Baron barrels, Cabernet barrels out of Bordeaux, and as fruity as you get the same flavors coming through from Napa, you're going to get that earthy flavor that really is pervasive throughout the tasting experience with the finished bourbon. So we get, what we want there is to make sure that they're freshly dumped. As soon as they dump them, they send to us at the distillery in Kentucky, where we put the aged bourbon in there and start aging it at that point.
All right.
And those flavors really come out.
One more question. This will be real short, just for all four of you. Present company excluded, of course. But if you had to drink a bourbon this afternoon before dinner, what would it be? Vinnie, we're going to start with you.
Ooh, I'll be honest. I'm a wine and beer guy. So but I will say I opened the 2008 Silver Oak last night with dinner in honor of today. So.
All right, Trey, what do you say?
I usually drink the 15-year-old Van Winkle because Julian drops it off by the case to me.
All right, Julian, what
Tell
about you?
him to drop some off at my porch too. Number one would be to go down in my secret cellar somewhere, and this undisclosed, by the way, where that is, and get some of my father or grandfather's old Weller whiskey. But there's not a lot of that to go around because I'm trying to drink it all up so my kids don't get any when I'm gone. But obviously, number two on my list would be W.O. Weller, and that's hard to find too. But same flavor profile as ours, just a little younger, but it's great.
That's good stuff. And Tony, we're gonna let you have the last word here. I hear you're a bit of a bourbon fan yourself.
So I'll have to admit it. I am a pretty big fan of bourbons and whiskeys, and as far as what I'd try, I'd be happy to try the Jefferson from the Chapelet barrels, or any of the old Rip Van Winkle. I'm pretty much up for any of that.
All right, good taste, folks. Good tastes. Julian, Trey, Vinnie, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun. And now we're going to turn it back to David and Nate to take some more questions.
Thanks, Clay. That was a pretty cool conversation with a lot of different people, and David and I were giggling over here. Tony has been known to be a fan of the brown stuff, and Tony, I have a little surprise for you. We do have some old Jeffersons in Pritchard Hill barrels for after we wrap this whole thing. But and if we're talking about dropping stuff off of people's houses, we'd be happy to give you the address to the winery here. We'll be here anytime. So we did have a couple questions come through, and the first is for you, Tony. William's asking, what happens to the barrels after you bottle the wine?
Well, we do have, I guess unlike the whiskey guys where they can use the barrels for 20 to 100 years, we once or twice use them, and then we do have a stream. Well, so some of them go to Vinnie, right? And we're always looking for a place that somebody could use the barrels for wine and neutral cooperage, as they call it, or sometimes off they go to the planters with the 4-year barrels. But every year we have quite a good stream of barrels that we look to move.
It's quite a steady stream indeed. I can attest to that for sure. So I think the next question we have time for one more. This one's going to go to David. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. Trey, Julian, Vinnie, great to see you. Tony, and of course, Clay, thanks for moderating. But David, this one's for you to toss to Trey. Why did you start making bourbon on the sea?
So I guess start making bourbon where?
On the sea?
In the sink?
In the sink or the sea?
So
wait, was this for David?
Before we get to that, I want to thank Vinnie and Julian and Trey and Clay as well. And, one of the things that we love to do at Silver Oak is to barter. So I'd be more than happy to trade product for product, guys. So we really appreciate you being here on such a busy day and on a Saturday. So just thank you. So, okay, Nate, throw me that question again.
This one's for Trey. Why did you start making bourbon on the sea?
There you go.
Well, I was lucky enough to be on a friend of mine's ship that catches great white sharks, so it could handle barrels on it. But basically, I saw bourbon sloshing around in my glass, and I thought if that would happen in the glass, it would happen in a barrel, and that would force maturation in a different way. Luckily, what's happened with it, when we cross the equator, is that extreme heat caramelizes the sugars in the wood, the salt air permeates the barrel, and then you got the constant contact with the wood. So those three things combined gives it taste that many people say tastes like salted caramel popcorn. And as Clay said, it's really going back to how whiskey turned into bourbon in the first place. It was going on those boats that really aged whiskey for the first time.
From Kentucky to New Orleans.
You got it. Where are you, Julian? I'm in Sarasota.
You're in Sarasota?
Yeah.
I'm about 4 miles away and
I'll text you. Let's get a drink.
Come on over.
All right.
Happy Land, happyco.com. I had nothing to do with it. Wright Thompson wrote it. He's a pretty good guy.
Go.
That's my cheap promo for the day.
Hey, I'd sure like to invite Trey and Julian to the Cooper sometime, and I just also should let them know that we make all our whiskey barrels with eight hoops still.
No kidding.
All right.
Mine must be expensive.
You can afford it, Julian. Just increase the price of the bourbon.
I think we can do that.
Well, thanks to you guys for joining us once again. We really appreciate it. And, I think, David, you got something really special to announce.
Okay, we are on to the last segment. We really appreciate you all hanging out, enjoying release day with us. We are very happy to have you here. Before we move on to the musical interlude or end, let me remind you that we do have our library open. We have so many special back vintages and large format bottles that have been in our care for all these years. Maybe not as old as the oldest Fappy, but we appreciate your guys' interest in the wine. So please check out silveroak.com. We are super happy to have you acquire these wines that we only release from the winery a couple times a year. On behalf of our entire production crew, the whole bunch here at Silver Oak, everybody that made this possible today, very special shout out to Ian Leggett, our Chief Marketing Officer. Cheers, Ian. And we thank you so much on behalf of the Duncan family, my brother Tim. Happy virtual release day. This was almost like the real thing because we say we never know what happens on release day. So we have another saying at Silver Oak, which is life is a Cabernet. Woo!